The dice for Darklands are a little bit different than the normal dice that role players might be used to, where although it's a D10 mechanic, the 0 is actually a 0 and like a 10, which the role players would be used to.
Yeah, I mean it's just a specific thing for us that we like to do is that they're not strict D10, they're 0 to 9. It allows us to have the 0 is just a low ball, it's an outright miss, and the 9s explode in Darklands. So if you roll to hit and you roll a 9, then you get 2 hits. It's an additional bonus hit. So if you have 3 attack dice, for example, and you're rolling to hit and you roll 3 9s, or you've hit 6 times, it has that real potentially brutal mechanic that can kick in. For example, it can also work defensively. If you roll to parry and you roll 3 9s, you've actually parried 6 enemy dice that's coming in, so you can really fight them off.
So when people watch the battle report that we recorded earlier, what they'll see is effectively you saying, well, that's a 9, so that counts as an extra dice, and then you take an extra dice with that in the case of to hit rolls or parry rolls. But also it can explode in damage as well.
If you roll a 9 to when you've actually damaged someone, you roll in to wound them, you roll a 9 for each damage dice that's gone through. If you roll a 0, you've done nothing. It was just a nick, just a flesh wound. If you roll a 9, you get to roll another dice, and if that dice is a 9, you get to roll another dice. My record so far is 3 9s in a row. I've not beat that. In
that case, you've got the 9 there plus the 2, so 11 in that case for damage.
Yep. If that additional dice there was a 9, it'd be 18 plus another dice.
So obviously, even the smallest character can get very lucky and take down something.
Yeah, it's that potential. It's the potential David versus Goliath element where it's unlikely to happen, but it just might.
And I guess there's also the D100 mechanic. So in that case, it's just a black dice first.
Yeah.
So in that case, the roll is 34.
34. Yeah. It's 0 to 99 effectively.
So Tim, describe how you actually build the force, the muster. So how do you design your army? So this is a little bit composite of what we'll be using in the demo game.
Yep.
So what do we actually have here, and how do you construct it?
Well, first things first, in the game of Darklands, you decide what gold cost you want to go to, which is effectively the points value. So we recommend just for these initial games, 499. Okay, that's 499 points of gold that you have to spend on your army. Now, at that point, you want to choose who your general is. That's where you start. In this force, we've got the battle drum there. Now, when you've chosen who your general is going to be, you look at his authority value. That's 75 in this case, which means he has 75 points of authority to spend on mustering his host. Now, these guys cost, I think it's 12 authority to field. These guys are a little more, and these guys are 22. So as you can see, if you add it all up, it comes up to, I think it's about 56 for these guys, which falls well within his authority value. Now, it's just to ensure that you've got enough commanders, you've got enough chiefs to field your Indians, sort of thing.
Right, so basically in this smaller game, what you're effectively going to do is pick your war chief. He'll have a certain amount of authority points that your guys need to add up and to under.
Correct.
So as you go to a larger game, then obviously you're going to quickly exceed the authority that one man can manage.
That's right. Yeah.
So how does that work in a larger game?
Well, that's when your sub commanders come in. In a larger game, you would have you would also have a more competent general than this guy, battle drone. You would probably be fielding a war drone who's got an higher authority to begin with. That's somewhere in the 80s. So you can also probably field an additional unit than what this guy can field because he's much more competent. And then going forward from there, you would have sub commanders. So let's say in a bigger game, I have a war drone, and he fields his own muster, which is probably these guys he'd probably field another unit as well. And then he would have some sub commanders, which might be a magic user. It could be another battle drone that would lead the host, and they would also bring their mates with them. So you've got your guy who's in charge. He's got his own retinue, if you will, and then he has his sub commanders who is brought to host with them, and they would, let's say for example, I've got a battle drone. That battle drone might bring a manticore and a unit of brutes along with them, and they're under his authority.
So just to kind of illustrate that, then, so this could be your so if this guy was your warlord, this guy could be your war chief.
Yep, let's say for example.
And he might have brought a unit of, let's just say, 10 for these guys.
Yep.
Of 10 of these guys. Now, does he have his whole authority point again to spend as a pool on what he brings?
That's right. Yep. So that's how you expand your authority values. Basically, this guy has got 75 to spend. You might have another guy who's got 60 to spend. So this guy spends all his 75 on his retinue. Now his sub-commander brings his own retinue with him. Think of him as his drinking buddies, for example. Yeah. And he brings those along with him. Or it could just be, okay, I'm 10 authority points short. I'm getting that big monster I want to field in this host. So what I'll do is I'll buy a nice cheap sub-commander put him in his pants, don't give him any additional items or anything like that whatsoever, but he brings with him that authority value, allowing me to bring that Gribbly that I want to bring, that Chimera, that Manticora, or something like that.
So in the game, we're going to go talk on about orders in a minute, but in the game, this sub-commander would be issuing orders to the unit he controls.
That's right.
If he was to die for some reason, does the general still have the capability to...
Yeah, the general can issue orders to anyone that he wishes. He is in charge. So he can issue orders to his sub-commander, who can then take him to his the units to his retinue, or he can just come on and bully his way through and say, look, do as you're told.
Right.
The general is you. The general is you. He has an authority range that he can issue orders within, and it allows you to, the sub-commanders effectively allow you to extend that, because let's say his authority range is 10 inches on this guy, he can give it to him and he can pass his authority range on another 6 or 7 inches. So it just gives that better reach along the battlefield.
Right, so let's talk about placement a little bit then. So let's assume this is our force. Let's just take these guys off for now so we don't complicate things. What's the typical placement of an army on the field then? So what's the distance that you can place when you're choosing to place?
We usually recommend, certainly for the lower gold cost values games, that you play on a 4 foot by 4 foot board, and you deploy up to 10 inches on, and not within 5 inches of the sides. So that gives you a deployment zone that you can go onto, and from that point, obviously you can deploy out of that and begin your game. It just keeps you that sensible distance apart for the early couple of turns, so you're not just doing turn 1 charges left, right and centre.
And would you typically roll off to see who gets the side of the book towards the board?
Yes, you can roll off to see who gets side of the boards. I mean, or you can be a bit more gentlemanly. I mean, one thing I like to do is, if I'm just playing a friendly game against a clubmate, things like that, I'll say, you set the table up, and I'll choose sides. And that means that there's no, oh, I'd just like to put this hill here because, and things like that. So it's even and fair that way. One thing you can do then is, but you can roll to see who put sides. But I mean, I just prefer just the quickest way, but that's me personally.
So just talking about terrain, so we won't show the terrain now on this particular video, but obviously look at the battle report to see the amount of terrain that's required on the 4x4 board. But one thing I think it's worth mentioning is if we can just talk around trees and hills.
Yeah, we play. We use an abstract way of playing trees and hills in Darklands, in that we play them as being infinitely high. Now the reason we do that is, in a real life battlefield, you can hide behind a hill. You can't be seen when you're behind a hill. Now the thing about that is we don't all have 10-inch high hills in our gaming collection. So most hills that you'll see, we're actually using some of the GF9 hills here, is that they're typically around 2 or 3 inches high. Now if you go true line of sight with hills and woods, one, you can't hide behind a hill pretty much ever, because some of our models are 50mm to the eye for like a monster infantry model, and two, for woods, it's just 3 trees on a base. You can see straight through it, so what's the point in a wood? For that example, so we say the trees and woods are infinitely high, so you just got to imagine it's a much more densely forested area than you actually see on the battlefield, and the hills are much higher.
So as with a typical start of the game, then the first thing you should do with your opponents is agree what is a hill and what is a tree and what the extent is.
Yeah, you'd go through it, you say, okay, so we treat this as difficult terrain, okay, there's a hill, there's a wood, they're infinitely high. The good thing about the infinitely high stuff is it cuts down on the effect that some of the ranged attacks might have in the battle, because you've got places to hide, you've got places to take cover, then you can pop out and then they can have a go at you. It cuts down the effect of, oh, I'll just sit in the corner and hit you with all my ranged fires for the entire game.
And is there any advantage of putting your ranged troops on a hill then?
Yeah, because hills are infinitely high, you can see over intervening troops. So if you put your archers on a hill, for example, and you've got some of your friendly guys in front of them, you can see over their heads. And
but there's no actual, other than that, there's no mechanic on the hit roll to do it.
No, you can basically see and be seen. It's a line of sight advantage.
So let's talk about the first turn then, the initiative roll then. So both of you set up on either side of your board. It's 2 generals basically, and you're going to have a roll off to see who gets to determine whether they want to activate one of their units first or not.
Yeah, that's right. This all comes down to who's the better general that you've got on the table now. For example, my battle drone that I use in the battle report has an authority of 75. So you roll, and for example, there he scores 70. Bang on 70, so he's rolled under his authority, so that's where he's coming from. The Gadbach's Tain, his authority is somewhere in the 60s, I believe it's 62. He's rolled 6, he's beaten. First of all, you've got to roll under your own authority. If you roll over your authority, you've made a mess of it from the beginning, you've automatically failed. Your opponent then known needs to roll under his authority, and then it's who has got the lowest roll. So in this case, they both rolled under the authority. The Gadbatch team got 6. He's clearly the more wily general on this turn, and he can choose whether he wants to go in first or second activation.
So the authority rerolls, is that only on subsequent turns?
Yeah, the reroll comes in if you lost the previous roll off. You get a reroll on your next authority check. You see who goes first on the activations. But if you ever roll over your authority on the activation roll off, you've gone bust.
Right.
And it's tough.
So when you do win the authority, so let's say you've won, would you be able to choose whether I go first?
Yeah, I can choose to either put you in first or take the first activation for myself. Sometimes it's more tactically advantageous to put your opponent in first. You've won the authority check, so you're the better general. It's up to you.
But if you pass it on to me, it would be up to me to determine which of my units activate. You don't actually get to choose.
I could turn around to you and say, okay, David, I've won the authority test. I'm going to put you in first. Off you go, and then you choose one of your units to activate, and away you go. This is where, especially in the larger games, it's handy to have 1 or 2 cheaper units that are effectively chaff. They're not going to do a great deal in the game. Perhaps you might just have a single brute rampaging around the battlefield, but he uses up an activation, and it's nice and cheap. A single brute is relatively low on gold. Just looking here, is 54. It's 54 gold, but he's a way of using up an activation. So because the early games, so some of the later rounds, it can be like a game of poker. Of see who's going to play their hand first. You might be saving back your general's activation because you want to retain and hit him with a double retain initiative. Or for example, so at that point it's like, how to use this brute? He's not going to do anything anyway. It's nice and cheap. I'll chuck him up his activation use, and then it's put the pressure back on you.
So when it comes down to the both sides will then actually assign tokens to their units, which is their initial orders, which are hidden.
Yep.
And then you obviously turn them over to indicate that you're activating that unit.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the 3 different types of orders that you can actually apply to the unit. So you have the hold, the move, and the attack.
Yep.
So do you want to talk through how those different orders?
Okay, hold orders. If you put a unit on hold orders, it can't move. It can turn to face, but it can't move. But what hold means is it's really good for missile troops because they're basically staying still and they can perform a volley fire, which means that they've because they've not been moving around, they've got more time to load their weapons and fire. They double the amount of shot attack dice that they have. So for the drone archers, for example, you saw in the battle report, there were 7 of them. Instead of rolling 7 attack dice, they're rolling 14. So it's really effective. The downside of being a hold orders means you can't move, so they're stuck in place unless I can change their orders. They're effectively, not very good at reacting to things. It's good for combat units if you put them on hold orders. If you've got them in more of a defensive role, you can use them as a bit like a brick. When you're on hold orders, it's harder to be hit and it's easier for you to parry.
So if you knew you were going to be charged anyway, if you'd kind of looked at the battlefield and worked out, I'm going to be charged no matter what happens.
Yep.
I might as well put this unit on hold orders, turn it into a bit more defensive.
Yeah, where I missed a trick in the battle report that we played is at one point I stuck my drones right in front of the Tarvats, if you remember, so the Tarvats could charge, but they couldn't perform a swift charge. What I also should have done is when I moved my battle drone up behind them, is taken an authority test, which I was going to pass 75% at the time, to change their orders to hold orders, which would have made it harder for the Tarvats to hit them. Now, as it was, I got lucky. The downside of being on hold orders is that you can't move, you can only turn to face, and B, you when you're fighting back, your attack dice, you half your attack dice rounded down to a minimum of 1.
Right, yeah, so you're truly going into defensive mode.
Actually, I think I might do a minimum of 0, that's why I didn't do the attack actions.
So next up we have move.
Yep. Okay, move is basically, it's a way of getting around the battlefield nice and quickly. You'll often see people putting it on their generals the first couple of hours, simply because it allows you to move to triple your pace. It represents them, holstering their weapons and getting a bit of a jog on and running to where they need to be. What you can't do on move is you can't go into combat, you can't charge, you can't do an attack move or anything like that. It's basically a way of getting around the battlefield nice and easily. If you wanting to charge with them later, you're going to have to change the orders to attack orders or let them get charged.
Yeah, so move lets you go for the triple movement of the...
Yeah, it's good on some minor troops. If one model that we have, such as like Cagnolfon is a big ball beast, for example, it's a good way. He can just run down one flank in pretty much in a turn because it allows you to go to triple your pace. then you need to change your orders to attack orders, and you can get a nice juicy flank charge.
So obviously we're going to go on to talk about changing orders in a minute, but obviously the thing you do need to bear in mind about the move orders is you do need to have someone within command range
to change those
orders back to something more useful afterwards.
Yeah, it's up to your general or commander to be going around changing orders. If you can't do that, then they're stuck on those orders.
But you still can attack back well under move orders. You just can't.
Yeah,
you can't initiate the attack.
Yeah, they're not robots in that they're just automatons. If they attack, they're going to hit you back.
Right. So then we've got attack orders as well.
Attack orders are the most commonly used orders in the Darklands because they basically allow you to charge, and lots of things in Darklands like to go and hit you over there with big things. So attack orders basically means you can go up to your pace value, or you can go up to twice your pace value, and get a bit of a run on towards the enemy. So you can't go quite as fast as you could on move orders, but you can charge on attack orders, which is crucial. If you charge up to your pace value, it's easier to hit. If you charge above your pace value, it's easier to hit, and it's also harder for your opponents to parry your attacks. And if you're something big and juicy like a monster or monster infantry, they'll do impact hits on a swift charge.
So was that the swift charge you were talking about earlier in the demo game? So if you can get enough run up, it becomes a swift charge rather than a normal charge.
You saw at one point, both me and Jamie were both sticking things in our opponent's face because we knew we were going to get charged, it was inevitable, but we didn't want to get swift charged. And then you saw at one point when the Gadback's Tane came into the brute, he'd got swift charge, so it was easy for him to hit, it was harder for the brute to parry his blows. And if he'd have been a monster, he'd have also done some impact hits as the monster's basically go when it crashes into things. There's a slight downside to being on attack orders in that you have to end your move closer to the enemy than you begun it. So you can't hold back. You're committed to going forward.
But you have to move. Do you have to move a minimum amount closer, or is it?
You've got to, it's at least an inch. So you can just edge forwards an inch and be a bit cheeky. But also things like foul troops are always on attack orders. You've got very little control over foul troops. They're always on attack orders, and if they can charge, they have to charge. It's one way that you can pre-measure in Darklands. Yeah. You have to measure their charge.
So as we saw in the demo game earlier, the general can actually change his orders regardless of what you've given them.
That's right. Your general is effectively you. So you've got much more flexibility because he's conveying your thoughts of what you have on the battlefield. So, for example, he's not going to get stuck on an order because it's you, so you can change your mind.
So you could, for example, if you thought you were going to be charged and you want him to be defensive, you could put him on a hold order.
That's right.
But then when your opponent doesn't actually attack him, you could then, when you activate him, change his order to maybe attack or move, and move into combat, which is already going on.
Yeah, as you can see with your general, you've got much more flexibility in what he's going to do because he automatically does as he's told because that's basically your avatar on the battlefield. So
let's talk about changing orders then. So let's assume that this unit here is on attack. Well, actually they're bow units, so let's put them on hold, be a bit more realistic. So assuming they're on hold, and this unit here is on move.
Right.
Now let's assume you want to change that then. So they can't change it themselves.
No.
You have to use the general to do that.
That's correct. So what I might do here is you would activate your general. Okay, now he can issue orders at the beginning or the end of his movement, but he can't interfere with his movement halfway through, for example. So let's say that he was a bit further back from these guys, his authority range is 7 inches, so I would say, okay, I want to change these guys onto attack orders. So I take, is that within 7 inches? Yes it is, thank you very much. So I take an authority test, I roll 44, which is less than his authority 75. Those guys are changed to attack orders. Now my general, let's say he's on a move order so he can go triple his pace. Currently, these guys are out of his authority range, so let's run him around. He's got 15 inches to play with, so that's nice and easy. And then he can then test, that's the end of his movement, he can then see if he can change the drone's orders, and he's failed. He's rolled a 97, so what would happen there, this is the downside about changing orders, is if you get it wrong, they are they are disordered for that activation, so they lose their activation. Well, basically the general's made a mess of changing or something like that. He's made a mess of changing orders. They've either misheard it, some Chinese whispers or something like that, and they miss out on their activation. So
when you have assigned, when you've tried to change the orders of a unit and you failed the roll, the unit's disordered.
That's right.
So in the demo game, what we saw was a lot of attack back combinations where a unit would go in, and then the other unit would get a free, well, not get free activation, but they would be able to activate without cost.
That's right.
Attacking back.
Yeah.
Is a disordered unit able to still do that, or are they completely disordered?
No, disordered units lost pretty much their entire activation. They can neither do the activation you wanted them to do, and nor can they elect to attack back as their activation. They're effectively, because you tried to activate them and failed, they are now disordered and also weary. For example, if I've been charged by some Tarvax with my extras and I've elected to attack back with my extras, that is their activation used up. Now they can only elect to attack back if they haven't already had their activation. So for example, here, if I failed to activate them, then I've lost the activation.
Yeah, so the best way to think about it is literally you lose your activation, you lose your capability.
Gone, yeah.
So there is quite a risk then with trying to change orders.
It can get you out of a pinch, but if you've got a better general, it's fine. Like some of the Fomrat generals, like Cran for example, running around with 90 something authority, they can change orders willy-nilly. But some of your lower guys, like the Galbrax Tain in this game, is authority 62. So you can see there he's got a 30% chance of actually failing when he's issuing an order.
So let's talk a little bit about stat cards then. So each of the units comes with a sort of printable stat card that you can then laminate up.
Yep.
And for the unit cases, you get several of the models can be tracked on one card.
Right.
And then obviously on the bigger monsters, it's a single monster per card.
Yeah.
So if we have a look at the Axtruun unit here, what I'll do is I'll put the Axtruun units now on the screen.
Right. Yep.
So if you want to talk through some of the different stats. And the way the damage boxes are set out, etc. for the Axtruns.
Okay, yeah. So we'll start off with Axtruun's actual stats. Now his pace is 5. That's how much he can move. So if he's just doing a regular move, he can go up to 5. If he's on attack orders, he can go up to 10. If he's on move orders, he can march up to 15. Now typically you're going to be going up to your pace or up to double your pace if you've charged. So that's a nice easy way to remember that. His skill is basically how skillful a warrior he is, how good he is with his axe, how good he is with his bow. So you can see this Axtruun, his skill is 38, which is slightly above some of the troops in the game, because Axtruans are generally quite well trained. That's basically what you would compare with your opponent's skill to see what you need to hit. For example, my Axtruan skill is 38. If I'm going against a Tarvax, their skill's somewhere in the 20s, I'm going to need 4s to hit them.
Right, so what we'll do now is we're just showing up the skill attack chart. So that's where the skill comes in. Basically, you find your attacker's skill value, compare it to your defender's skill value, and then that's plus modifiers obviously for certain situations like charging. That's what you need to roll on the number of dice you
That's right. I mean, anyone who's ever played a game like Warhammer or something like that is going to be very very au fait with this sort of thing. So as you can see, the Axtruan skills is somewhere in the 30s, the Tarvax is somewhere in the 20s. The Axtruan's going to need 4s to hit him. The Tarvax going back, he needs 5s to hit him. It's more difficult for the Tarvax to hit.
So we've got Might next.
Yeah, might is basically how big, how strong somebody is. Now your might value can combine with your weapon value. So for example, if we look here, the might of the Axtruan is 34 because he's a nice big strong lad. He's got he's got a good 6-pack on him there. If you then look at his combat weapon he's equipped with, he has an axe. Now that has an attack dice value, which is 1. So as you can see, the Druid in combat rolls 1 attack dice to hit. His weapon plus value is 16. So if you add that to his might, it gives you a might and weapon value of 50. Now again, if you look at the chart, you'll see that if his might and weapon combined is 50, you would look against somebody's constitution armor value, which we'll just talk about in a second, and again you would see what your opponent would need to roll to bounce off that attack. So if I roll to hit, I come with my big axe, bang, I've hit you. Now the dice then goes to the opponent, who's like, okay, what does my guy need to either shrug that off on his natural armour or his armour, or perhaps to dodge or something like that, and he gives you the dice roll that he would need. So
as we saw in the demo game earlier, the battle pot earlier, effectively you have a pool of dice, you roll, the number that you hit with you then hand to your opponent, they then check the chart, comparing the might value of your weapon plus your weapon skill versus constitution armour. They're then rolling against that number, taking away a number pool of the dice, and then whatever's left of that dice they hand back to you to roll damage.
Yeah, it gives you a bit of interaction with your opponent. Rather than you there aggressively rolling dice and I've hit, I've wounded, there's a bit of, okay, I've hit, now you try and stop them. Okay, you failed to stop those ones, now I'm going to see exactly how bloody those those blows were. So next you go on to constitution. Now you can see the Druid's constitution is 15. He's got a little bit of armour because they're wearing some light armour. They're generally showing off their 6-pack because they like the ladies. But generally, as you can see, his constitution armour is 23. Now, if a blow comes in at the Axtruan, you would compare your opponent's might and weapon with the Axtruan's constitution and armour, and again, as we spoke about earlier, that would give you the dice roll that the Druid would need to deflect those blows. Now, once the blows are through, you would roll a D10 for each blow that's come through. Things like the axe, as you can see that the Druid has, if you look under the wounds plus value, is 1d10. Generally, great weapons roll an extra dice for each dice that goes through. So if you attack with a Druid and he hits, he has 1 attack dice, he's actually running two wound dice. So the Druids are quite good at chopping up people.
Right. So Fortitude, what's Fortitude for?
Fortitude is basically someone's willingness to hang around when things are going bad. If when your general dies, the next guy with highest authority effectively takes over command, but everyone's going to have to take a Fortitude test to say, well, am I staying here or am I going? Someone with a low Fortitude is more likely to flee when things are going sour. Someone with a higher Fortitude is more likely to hang around.
But like the courage of a person then.
Yeah.
And then obviously we've got authority, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah, authority works 2 ways. Number 1, for your general, you use the authority value to see how good he is at giving orders and fielding orders. Now, for a unit like the Druids, it's how easy they are to summon. So 22. So for example, the battle Druid could actually bring 3 units of action to the battle to combat because their authority value is 22. Also, if things go really sour and your general dies, then you look at the authority value and the guy with the highest authority takes control. And then next we look at temper, and temper's basically it's magic resistance. If someone's coming at you with a magical attack, certain magical attacks will actually roll to see if they affect you against your temper. Now the lower your temper, the worse you are. The higher your temper, the better you are at shrugging off magical attacks. Most things generally have quite a low temper unless they're magically attuned themselves.
So on a stat card like the Axe Druids, you'll have a line for each Axe Druid. So if we had a unit like this unit here, where we had 5 of them, you would basically be using those five sets of wound boxes.
That's right, and you just what we do is we laminate our cards, we print them off, laminate them, and then just get a dry wipe magic marker, and you just tick off every time you take a wound. Obviously, when that guy is boxed, you remove him and you move on to the next guy. So I think you saw in one example that the Tarvax did enough to kill 3 Druids outright, so I just boxed 3 off, and then the wounds carried on to the 4th guy.
So do you have to assign the wounds to someone who's already wounded in subsequent rounds?
Yes, but however, the wounded warrior, as we call it, is always your choice as the owning player. So when you have to take guys off the battlefield, for example, who are in close combat, now you always have to take the guys off who are within the attack range of your opponent first, because it stands to reason that he'll be killing the ones closest to him.
Yeah.
But you can always say who the wounded warrior will be for that reason. And
so if you had a Tarvax here attacking these 3 Axe Druids,
yep,
and one of these comes off, you could choose which of these 3 becomes the wounded warrior.
That's right.
And can you change? Obviously, you only decide the wounded warrior at the point where you have to take one off.
Yeah,
right?
and it's always your choice within those parameters. So, for example, if he kills 2 Druids, the first parameter is it's got to be within his attack range, which is an inch. So it's one of these 3 Druids, 2 of these 3 Druids I've got to take off. However, I could take off that one and that one, or I could choose to take off those 2.
So
sometimes it can be tactically flexible to have that choice.
So in that same scenario, say the unit's laid out like this, and we had another different unit of Tarvax in this case coming in here. So this is a different unit, so it's going to roll separately. So it rolls to hurt this guy here. The damage still comes off the Wounded Warrior chart, however the only option for the Wounded Warrior is now this guy. So if this guy had come in and done 6 points of damage, and then this guy came in and did another 6 points of damage, we would take off, it's 12 points of damage has been taken off in total. 2 carry forward to one of these guys, but this guy comes off as the Wounded Warrior. Yeah,
you can basically treat the wounds as a pool. You've got a pool of wounds within the unit, and it's always at the point you have to decide when you can say which one is a Wounded Warrior.
Cool, thanks for that.
It speeds the game up no end. If you need to record one guy within the unit that was a Wounded Warrior, 1, you find yourself always hiding him at the back, and 2, it just complicates things for when you're marking off wound allocation, because you start having more than one guy is wounded within the unit. This way ensures that you only have one guy within the unit that's wounded, so it treats it like a pool of wounds.
Cool, so that's the basics of a unit type of card where the damage boxes are just pure damage boxes for each model. If we look at someone like the Malox now, so he has multiple attacks, but also he has these yellow boxes in his damage track.
Yes, as you can see, if you've got the stat line up at the moment, if you get down to, at first he's got a bit of a buffer zone between 51 and 74, so at that point he can take those attacks without suffering any setback from his own offensive output. The minute he gets to one of those yellow boxes and you put a cross through them, because you've basically taken that wound, he loses an attack. Now it's your choice which attack to lose from Trample, Tuskor or his Raking Claws. Now you can't choose to lose him from his bulk charge, because that's his inherent bulk. If he charges something, you can't choose to lose that. But normally what you would do is, for a monster, you would often find yourself in a bit of a timid tip here. You usually take the weakest attacks off first, so in this instance I would take off trample attacks first. He has 3 of those, and as you can see, trample attack, it's the weakest attack, it has the least attack range and does less damage.
So each yellow box you cross is 1 attack dice off
One
an
attack dice, yes.
And then obviously once you've exceeded, can you go down to 0 in attack?
Yes, so what you would do is, you can see the first 3 yellow boxes are at 50, 40 and 30. Now when they have gone, you would mark off all 3 of your trample attacks. Again, I would recommend you do that first. And then when you get down to 20, you've got a choice. Do you choose to lose an attack from your raking claws or from your tusk score? Again, comparing them here, personally, I would take them off the tusk score first, because...
So obviously it adds an extra element of tactical awareness then when you choose which attacks you want to disable and which ones you don't.
Yeah, it's basically representing the fact that the more you're going to hit a big gribbly like that, the weaker it's going to become. It starts bleeding out, so from that element its constitution gets lower, so its constitution plus armour value becomes lower, so it's easier to, well, it's more difficult for that creature to then shrug off any attacks that you may hit it with, so it's easy to wound in the first place. And also its offensive output lowers, because let's say for example the Malox, there was a bit of a pincushion, the brutes have been in it over the head and things like that, so it's, you know, it's bleeding heavily, and it was finding it much harder to pick itself up and start, you know, thumping people. So
the constitution getting lower as well, is that based on the just purely 1-to-1 on the number of points of damage it's received?
Yeah, let's say this guy starts off with constitution 74, I go screaming in with a brute, do 20 damage, its constitution for any subsequent attacks from other units in other activations would be 54. Right. So let's say the brute had 4 or 5 different attacks. So let's say it was a creature coming in with 2 claws, 2 headbutts and something like that. Then those attacks are all counted as being simultaneous. So you don't hit, say, oh, I'll hit with this attack first, knock your constitution down, then hit you with another one. They all go in at once against whatever the constitution value is. It only drops once the attacks are finished.
So how does that apply to units like the axe drones then?
Well, in the axe drone's case, they're always on a minimum of 1, and they only have 1 dice to begin with. So yeah, the lowest you go down to is 1.
What about the constitution?
The constitution is fine because it's always on what the equal or majority is. So it would only ever count if you get down to the very last axe drone.
So when you get down to the last axe drone, you would then start taking into account
then you start looking at then you start looking at the wounded constitution plus armour value. But just again to keep things simple and fast, if you've got 9 axe drones, you only ever have to look down to the constitution and armour when 1's left. Other than that is whatever the healthiest individual has.
Yeah. So how about multiple attacks then? So if you look at the Malox card, you can see there's obviously multiple attacks.
Yep.
Does it get to attack with everything?
Yeah, because all the effects are simultaneous. If you like, you can pick up like 4 or 5 different coloured dice and say, well, the pink ones are for the tramples, the white ones are for the tusk score, and the black ones are for the raking claws, and just speed the game up by rolling them all at once. Other people like to do them one at a time, so because sometimes they have different different might and weapon values and different damage values. But so it's a way of keeping it easier in their head. It's up to you.
And if it's in combat with more than 1 unit, can it divide the attacks?
Yep. You can as long as that attack is in attack range. For example, the Malox has got 2 inches on its raking claws, 1 inch on its tusk score, and it has to be base to base with its trample. Let's say I'm base to base with the axe drones, stamp on those with 3 attack dice. 1 inch away is a battle drone, so I'll give him the tusk scores. And 2 inches away it might be some bow drones, and I could roll.
So on the multiple attack front, if you have one guy who's only got 1 attack left, but he's got say 6 dice on it, and he's in combat with 2 units, can I split those 6 dice between the 2 units?
Yes, you can split those as you wish. There's a caveat to that is, if you're activating back, having been attacked by a unit, you've got to put at least 1 on the guy who's attacking you in the first place to have triggered your attacks back, but then the rest you can put wherever you like, right, as long as they're in attack range.
Cool. So I think the last thing to talk through is just a very brief talk on invocations, spells, magic.
Yeah.
So do you want to describe briefly how that works?
It's one of my favourite game mechanics, invocations in Darklands, is that magic's powerful, but it comes at a cost. For example, let's say I've got a spell I want to cast. My current constitution, let's say it's 30 for example, the spell has a cost value, let's say it's 10. So to cast that spell, it weakens me by 10 constitution. So effectively you take wounds just for casting spells. So it cuts down on the just throwing around big spells for the sake of it with very little consequence aspects. Because every time you're casting a spell, it's coming at a cost. and you can basically take yourself down. I've done it in games before. You can take yourself down to like 1 or 2 constitution, and then the first time someone breathes on you, drop dead.
So you've got to think very carefully about when to use the magic and when not to use the magic. Yeah,
you can also boost either the range or the might and weapon of a chosen spell you wish to cast. And it's 1 constitution point per inch, or it's 1 constitution point per unit of might and weapon. So let's say I want to increase the attack range by 2 inches, that's 2 constitution, or I want to increase the might and weapon by 7, there's another 7 constitution there. It might make the spell easier to either in range or not, which is handy, or it might make it much easier to win that big monster, but again it comes at a cost.
Cool. So is there any healing in the game at all with spells then? Because obviously if there's a constitution value associated with it, do any of the kindred have healing spells at all?
Well, at the moment, one thing you can do with your with your magic user is you can choose to sort of meditate, and in which case you'll get a certain amount of constitution back. So rather than doing anything else, he's basically concentrating and he's healing himself back up. So that's one thing you can do. But again, why are you doing that? You're not doing other things. And there are certain spells that buff or heal or help, but by and large they're few and far between. A lot of the spells in Darklands are all about killing things.
And does the constitution always have to be your own, or do any of the casters have the ability to use constitution of units they're part of or models?
Gamla Braw, for example, he has a staff that's got a dead ancestor as a skull on top. Now he can use that ancestor's constitution that's held within his staff. So Gamla Braw's pretty good because he's more of a warrior as well, because he can fling lightning bolts around the place, and he can without basically losing his own constitution, it comes out of his staff. And then by contrast, in the same one you've got Brunhild, who can throw ravens around the place. So you're throwing lightning bolts and ravens around the place, but only one of them is taking damage against his constitution because he's got his staff. You'll find a lot of the magic users have a specific item to themselves that gives them a bit of a bonus in some way. Gamla Braw's is his staff. Thinking some sort of the Droom Seers have a staff. No, sorry, it's the Wigglies I'm thinking of from the Anglican. Their staff can increase the range of some of their invocations by up to D10 and things like that. So if you look at each individual magic user, you'll see that they have a very specific arcane artifact or something like that gives themselves some sort of bonus in some way.
Right, well, thanks so much for answering those rules-based questions and just some extra clarification from the demo game.
No problem.
What we'll be doing next time for the people who are watching is we'll be taking questions from either from the Kickstarter comments or from the forums, or there's also a Facebook group that the Mierce Militia have set up that they're running as a kind of community Facebook group.
Yeah, they're good guys.
So what we'll do next time before we come down is if people have particular scenarios or questions that they want us just to play out and explain the rules in a bit more detail on the table, we'll bring them along.
Dalton.
Thanks very much.
No problem, thank you, David.